Hi, I'm Associate Professor Mike Stewart at the Institute of Philosophy of Mind and Cognition at NYCU. Briefly, I'm going to summarize some of my research interests. You can see the three main ones here. I'm interested in scientific imagination. For example, what is it? How many kinds are there? What justifies its use in science? What roles does it play? And so on. Scientific understanding. This is a topic that philosophers of science have gotten interested in recently. The idea is that maybe the main goal of science is to produce understanding, not necessarily knowledge. So the question would be, what is understanding as opposed to knowledge? And what aspects or elements of scientific practice does a focus on understanding reveal? And thirdly, I'm interested in artificial intelligence. What role is it playing in science? How is it changing science, especially with respect to epistemology? So to begin, let me first try to outline my basic research approach. Very roughly, I take advantage of two different kinds of research methods. The first includes the traditional analytic philosophy methods, including things like conceptual analysis, thought experiments, argument, and so on. But I also use empirical methods. These include qualitative methods like interviews, observations, and social scientific methods of analysis for those sorts of methods, as well as quantitative methods, including surveys and statistical analysis. I combine these two sets of methods, the philosophical on the one hand and the empirical on the other, to try to produce new descriptive facts about scientific practice, which we can then analyze using philosophical methods to say something that's relevant to philosophical debates. So let me say a bit about how this works with respect to imagination. We have lots of questions that currently don't have answers, that presumably need empirical methods to answer them. Questions like, how many kinds of imagination are there in science? Or at least, given the way that scientists talk about imagination, how many different kinds do they identify in their own practice? When do they think it's okay to use imagination? Why do they think it's okay to use imagination? You might think the answer to that question is obvious. You need imagination to produce new hypotheses to test and so on. But actually, scientists use imagination in lots of different ways, and sometimes surprising ones. For example, they sometimes use imagination to justify claims about the world using imagination. And there are also questions you might think of as related to pedagogy or the social structure of science. For example, is it just the PI, the principal investigator of a lab, who gets to use imagination, or does everybody get to use imagination? Does the level of education or seniority of a lab member dictate, in any sense, how seriously people take the outputs of their imagination? How is imagination trained? Is it trained at all? How do you teach students to imagine? When do you teach students to imagine? When they're an undergraduate, a graduate, a postdoc, and so on. So I try to use answers to these questions to inform a philosophical account of scientific imagination, an account that would answer questions like these in a more general way about when imagination is justified to be used to do the different things that it's used to do in science, and why, drawing both on empirical research as well as philosophical debates in, for example, philosophy of mind, aesthetics, epistemology, as well as cognitive science. Second, with respect to understanding, again, I use a mixed methods approach. And here we're trying to address a slightly more traditional topic about the aims of science. And for a long time, philosophers argued that scientists only or mostly or should mostly try to produce new knowledge, which might be understood as new justified true beliefs. But more and more recently, philosophers of science have realized that aspects of scientific practice can't be captured or understood this way. You might think about highly abstracted, highly idealized models that include things like frictionless planes or the market behavior of perfectly rational economic agents, and so on. So what's going on with these? These are models where the scientists aren't trying to represent reality accurately. They are using models that are known to be false, but which are nevertheless useful. So what's going on here? Maybe it's the case that scientists aren't after justified true belief. Maybe they're trying to do something that's useful, something that allows them to do more with less. And the way that I think we should probably try to explain this is to focus on what scientists want to be able to do. If you look at scientific practice, not just the theoretical side, but also the practical side, a more engineering-based side, we have these massive projects like the project to try to create a working fusion reactor, or all kinds of projects in medicine to produce efficient vaccines and so on. It seems like the goal here is to gain new abilities to manipulate phenomena in stable, useful ways. Of course, I'm also interested in how or whether imagination can be used to increase understanding in this sense, understanding in the sense of new abilities. Finally, my third area of research interest involves artificial intelligence. Again, I want to use empirical methods to try to shed light on what AI is doing, what roles it's playing in modern science, how it's changing science. And of course, I'm also interested in how this affects the other two research topics. So how does AI expand or limit the power of human imagination? How does AI expand our abilities? In other words, how does AI help us to increase our own understanding in science? And whether it's ever permissible or acceptable to say that AI has its own understanding or abilities, or is understanding distributed across AI and its users. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening. If anybody's interested in discussing any of these topics, please contact me and don't be shy. I'm very happy to discuss any of this. Thanks very much.